The silence of the Oregon peaks was broken only by the rhythmic thud of Riley's sneakers on the gravel. "Mom, look," he shouted, pointing toward the rusted, silver veins of the old logging tracks. In the center of the rails lay a man in a tailored suit, his white shirt stained crimson, his hands bound by thick, abrasive rope. His eyes, dark, cold, and flickering with a mix of fury and fading hope, locked onto Nora's. "Don't stop," he rasped, the sound of a distant engine humming in the valley below. "If you stay, you die with me." The hunting knife was still wet with Silas's blood when Nora heard the doors slam below. She didn't look back. Looking back was how people died in the woods. Thomas had taught her that during her first elk hunt, 15 years and a lifetime ago. You keep your eyes on the terrain ahead, trust your ears for what's behind, and move like you know where you're going even when you don't. Especially when you don't. "Mom, I can't." Riley's breath came in sharp gasps beside her, his 12-year-old legs struggling to match her pace through the underbrush. "Yes, you can." She tightened her grip on his hand, half dragging him over a fallen log slick with moss. On her other side, Silas stumbled, his weight heavy against her shoulder, leaving a trail of blood droplets on the ferns that might as well have been neon arrows pointing straight to them. The voices behind them were calm. Professional. That scared her more than shouting would have. "Spread out. Thermal won't work under this canopy, so we do it the old way." Nora knew these woods the way she knew the shape of Riley's face in the dark, every game trail, every deadfall, every place where the ridge dropped away into nothing. But knowing and outrunning were different things entirely, especially with a bleeding man who probably weighed 200 pounds and a child whose longest hike had been the 3 miles to Cascade Lake last summer. There. She jerked her chin toward a dense thicket of salal and Oregon grape 30 yards upslope. "Crawl in as far as you can. Don't come out until I come get you." "What?" Riley's eyes went wide, white-ringed. "Mom, no. Do it." She pushed him toward the undergrowth, gentle but firm. "Riley, do you trust me?" He nodded, throat working. "Good boy." Her brave, terrified boy. "Then go. Now." He went, disappearing into the green with barely a rustle. She watched long enough to see the branches close behind him like water, then turned to Silas, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're sending him away so you can run faster," he said. "Not a question. I'm sending him away so he lives." She shifted his weight, wrapping his arm more securely around her shoulders. His suit jacket was shredded, the silk lining torn like someone had used him for knife practice. "Can you keep moving? Can you keep carrying me?" He smiled, all teeth and blood. "Because that's what you're doing, sweetheart. Dead weight. Then get lighter." She started moving again, angling northwest toward the Devil's Backbone, where the forest got mean and the rocks got treacherous and nobody who didn't grow up here had any business walking. Or shut up and bleed quieter. Behind them, maybe 200 yards back now, she heard the snap of a branch. Then another. They were coming in a line, she realized, sweeping through the forest like they'd done this before. Like they knew exactly how to hunt humans. Of course they did. They'd left Silas tied to train tracks. "Why did you save me?" His voice was barely a whisper now, fading at the edges. "Blood loss, probably, or shock, or both." "Because I'm an idiot." She ducked under a low-hanging hemlock branch, felt it scrape across Silas's back, heard his sharp intake of breath. "Because my son was watching. Because I don't know how to walk past things that are dying." Noble. Stupid. She could see the rock formation ahead now, 2 massive boulders leaning against each other like drunk friends, creating a narrow passage that opened into a small hollow on the other side. She and Thomas had made love there once, years ago, on a blanket that smelled like wood smoke and summer. There's a difference. The voices were getting closer. She could hear individual words now, clipped and tactical. "North quadrant clear. Moving to Rally Point. Blood trail heading up slope." Nora pulled Silas behind the boulders and pressed them both against the cold stone. His breathing was ragged, loud in the sudden stillness. She clamped her hand over his mouth, felt his lips move against her palm, a warning, maybe, or a curse. His eyes were fever-bright, boring into hers from inches away, and she realized with a jolt that she was close enough to count his eyelashes, close enough to smell cologne underneath the copper reek of blood, close enough to feel his heart hammering against her ribcage like it was trying to escape. Footsteps crunched through the undergrowth. Slow, methodical. A shadow fell across the gap between the boulders. Got blood here. A man's voice, rough as gravel. Fresh. Nora's hand tightened over Silas's mouth. His pulse jumped beneath her fingers. How fresh. Another voice, this one smoother. Educated. The kind of voice that gave orders and expected them followed. Minute, maybe two. A pause that stretched like wire. Nora could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, loud enough that surely they could hear it too. Surely they'd just walk around the boulder and find them pressed together like teenagers at a school dance, and then keep moving. They're heading for high ground. The shadow moved. The footsteps faded. Nora counted to 30, then 60, then 90 before she finally let her hand drop from Silas's mouth. He sucked in air, chest heaving. You smell like pine needles, he said, and then he laughed, a short, broken sound that might have been pain or might have been something else entirely. And I'm going to get you killed. Probably. Nora peeled herself away from him, from the stone, feeling the cold sweat on her back turn colder. But not today. She moved back into the open, listening. The forest had gone quiet again, that particular silence that meant predators were near. She could double back to Riley, grab him, try to make it to the lodge before dark. Or she could keep going deeper into the backbone, draw them away, hope they followed Silas's blood instead of doubling back to search for witnesses. Both options ended badly. She just had to choose which bad. There's a cave, Silas said behind her. 2 miles north. If you get me there, I can. How do you know about a cave? She spun on him. You're not from here. His smile was sharp enough to cut. I'm from everywhere, Mrs. Hayes. And I own half this mountain. The cave Silas mentioned didn't exist, or if it did, he was too delirious to give coherent directions. Nora stopped trusting his navigation after he pointed them toward a cliff face that dropped 200 feet into a ravine full of broken trees and old bones. Sit. She lowered him against a massive cedar, its trunk wide enough to hide them both from anyone passing on the trail below. If you could call the deer path they'd been following a trail. Riley Water. Her son appeared at her elbow, silent as smoke, holding out the dented canteen from her pack. He'd barely spoken since she'd retrieved him from the salal thicket, just followed her hand signals and footsteps like he'd been doing this his whole life instead of learning it in the last 90 minutes of pure terror. Silas's head lolled back against the bark. His white shirt wasn't white anymore, more rust than fabric, stiff with dried blood around the edges and wet dark in the center, where something had torn him open beneath his ribs. Knife wound, she thought, though she was trying very hard not to look too closely. Drink, she ordered, pressing the canteen to his lips. He drank 3 long pulls, then pushed it away. You should leave me. Shut up. I'm serious. His eyes focused on her with effort, pupils blown wide and glassy. They'll track me. They won't stop. And when they find me, they'll kill anyone standing close enough to identify them. Then I guess we don't let them find you. Nora pulled the first aid kit from her pack, the good one Thomas had insisted on, military grade, still sealed in plastic because she'd never needed it for anything worse than Riley's scraped knees. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Riley, I need you to watch the back trail. Anyone comes close, you signal me. 3 clicks, like I showed you. Riley nodded and melted into the underbrush, taking his fear with him and leaving only confidence behind. When had her baby learned to be brave? When had she stopped noticing? You don't have to do this, Silas said quietly. I know. She cut away what was left of his shirt, trying not to flinch at the damage underneath. But I already did it when I cut those ropes, so now we're stuck with each other. The wound was bad, but not fatal, not yet anyway. A deep laceration that had bled heavily but missed anything immediately vital. She packed it with gauze, her fingers moving through motions she'd learned from YouTube videos she'd watched after Thomas died, after she realized she was alone on this mountain with a child and no backup plan. Silas hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "You're good at this." "I'm terrified." She wrapped the bandage tight, watching his face for signs she was making it worse. "There's a difference." "Is there?" His hand caught her wrist, fast, despite the blood loss, despite everything. His grip was iron. "Because you don't look terrified. You look like you've done this before." "I haven't." She met his eyes, refusing to look away from whatever he was searching for. "I've patch-scraped knees and cleaned fish and field-dressed deer. I've never stitched up a man who was left to die by people who knew exactly how to make it hurt." "Good." He released her wrist. "Keep it that way." 3 clicks echoed from the brush where Riley was hidden. Then silence. Nora's heart stopped. She pressed one finger to Silas's lips, unnecessary. He'd already frozen, already gone still in that predator way that made her understand exactly what kind of man she'd pulled off those tracks. Voices drifted up from below, closer than they should be. Closer than was safe. "Lost the blood trail at the creek. Then find it again." The smooth voice from before, the one that gave orders. "He's wounded. He can't have gone far. Maybe he's already dead." A pause. Then, "Vane doesn't die easy. I should know. I've tried before." Laughter, cold and professional. The sound of men who killed for a living and slept fine afterward. Nora's hand found the hunting knife at her belt. Beside her, Silas's eyes tracked her movement, and something like approval flickered across his face. "She's got a kid with her," another voice said. "Younger. Uncertain." The thermal picked up 2 signatures before we lost them in the canopy. "Then we have 3 targets instead of 1. The smooth voice didn't change tone, didn't hesitate. "Clean it up. All of it." The voices moved away, boots crunching through dead leaves, fading back toward the creek where Nora had deliberately waded upstream for a quarter-mile before cutting back into dense forest. It had bought them time. Maybe enough. Maybe not. She waited until she couldn't hear them anymore, then waited another 5 minutes, then signaled Riley back. He emerged looking older than he had that morning. "They're hunting us." "Yes." "Are they going to kill us?" Nora looked at Silas, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between respect and resignation and a dark amusement that probably meant he was losing too much blood. "No," she said, and made herself believe it. "Because we know these woods and they don't. Because your dad taught me how to disappear when I needed to. Because I'm meaner than I look when someone threatens my kid." "You forgot one thing," Silas said softly. "What's that?" His smile was all edges. "Because I'm going to teach you how to fight back." The devil's backbone stretched ahead of them, miles of old-growth forest and vertical terrain and 1,000 places to hide or die. Nora had hiked it dozens of times with Thomas, knew its moods and dangers, knew where the ranger station stood empty and where the fire roads cut through and where the cell service disappeared into static. She'd never thought she'd be hunting here. Or hunted. "There's a firewatch tower," she said, making the decision as she spoke it. 3 miles northeast. Abandoned since the 90s, but the structure's solid. We can hole up there, see them coming from a distance. "They'll have drones by nightfall," Silas said. "Then we move at night." She helped him to his feet, felt him sway and steady himself with pure will. "Riley, you're on point. I'll follow." Silas takes rear. "In this condition?" Silas raised an eyebrow. "In any condition." She checked her compass, oriented toward the tower she hadn't visited in 3 years, and hoped like hell it was still standing. "Because if someone comes up behind us, I'd rather have the dangerous criminal between them and my son." Silas laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing through the green cathedral of the forest like something holy and profane at once. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I think I'm starting to like you." The Firewatch Tower was gone. Not abandoned, gone. Collapsed into itself like a broken promise, just a skeleton of charred timber and rust where Nora remembered climbing with Thomas to watch meteor showers and drink cheap wine and pretend they weren't two kids playing house on a mountain that didn't care if they lived or died. Plan B? Silas asked behind her, his voice thinner than it had been an hour ago. Nora stared at the wreckage and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not panic, exactly, but its close cousin. The thing that happened when all your certainties turned to smoke and you realized you'd been gambling with your child's life on outdated memories and desperate hope. There's a cave system. Riley's voice cut through her spiral, small but certain. Dad showed me once. Said the old bootleggers used it during Prohibition. She turned to look at her son, this stranger wearing Riley's face, this boy who'd grown up somewhere between the train tracks and now. You remember how to find it? I think so. He pointed west, toward a ridge that rose like a broken tooth against the darkening sky. There's a rock formation that looks like a bear. The entrance is underneath. Silas made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been pain. Bootlegger caves. Perfect. I always wanted to die somewhere with historical significance. You're not dying, Nora said, but she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. They found the bare rock as the last light bled out of the sky, a granite outcropping that did, in fact, look like a bear if you squinted and believed in signs. The cave mouth was narrow, hidden behind a curtain of wild blackberry that tore at Nora's jacket as she pushed through. Inside, the darkness was absolute and smelled of mineral cold and old earth. Riley clicked on the flashlight, also from Thomas's pack, still working after all these years, and the beam caught stalactites that hung like frozen rain. How far back does it go? Silas asked from the entrance, swaying on his feet. Far enough. Nora took his arm, guided him deeper into the cave where the ceiling rose and the floor leveled out into something almost comfortable. 20 feet from the entrance, 30, far enough that the flashlight beam didn't reach back to them, far enough that anyone looking in would see only darkness. She spread her jacket on the ground, lowered Silas onto it as gently as she could manage. In the flashlight's glow, his skin had gone the color of old paper, waxy and wrong. The bandage she'd applied hours ago was soaked through, dripping. Riley, I need the rest of the first aid supplies. And the emergency blanket. Her son moved without question, efficient and silent. When had he learned to be so capable? When had she stopped being the only adult in the room? Silas's eyes tracked her as she worked, cutting away the ruined bandage, exposing the wound that had somehow gotten worse despite her best efforts. You should have left me on those tracks. Probably. She cleaned the wound with water from the canteen, watched him bite down on his own fist to keep from screaming. But I'm stubborn like that. Ask anyone who knew my husband. Tell me about him. His voice was barely a whisper, threaded with pain. The man who taught you to be this. Nora's hands stilled. In the corner, Riley had gone very quiet, listening the way children do when adults talk about the dead. Thomas was a logger, she said finally, threading a needle she'd sterilized with a lighter, her hands steadier than they had any right to be. Third generation. He knew these mountains the way you probably know, I don't know, boardrooms? Dark alleys. Both. Silas smiled, sharp and bitter. Continue. He died 2 years ago. Equipment failure. They said it was quick. She pushed the needle through skin, felt Silas go rigid beneath her hands. They lied. I saw the accident report. Nothing about it was quick. I'm sorry. Don't be. Another stitch, another barely suppressed sound of agony. You didn't kill him. The mountain did. Or the lodge did. Or I did, for asking him to keep working when he wanted to quit, to sell, to move somewhere flat and safe and boring. That's not how it works. Isn't it? She tied off the stitch, started another. Isn't that exactly how it works in your world? People die because someone made a choice, and everyone left behind spends the rest of their lives doing math on who's to blame. Silas caught her wrist, weaker than before, but still deliberate. In my world, people die because I tell them to. There's no math involved. No ambiguity. His eyes found hers in the flashlight glow, dark and feverish and more honest than anything he'd said so far. Your husband died in an accident. The men hunting me tonight? I've killed their brothers, their friends, their fathers. I've burned their businesses and taken their money and made them kneel. And when they find me, if they find me, it won't be murder. It'll be justice. Is that what you tell yourself? Nora didn't look away. When you can't sleep at night? I sleep fine. But something in his face cracked, just for a second, just long enough for her to see the exhaustion underneath. I used to anyway. Before they tied me to those tracks and I realized everyone I'd ever trusted wanted me dead. Riley shifted in the darkness, a small sound of discomfort. Nora glanced at him, her sweet, sheltered boy who was learning too much, too fast about how the world really worked. Go check the entrance, she said gently. Make sure we weren't followed. He went, taking the flashlight with him, leaving them in darkness broken only by the glow of her phone screen. You're good at this, Silas said after a moment. Lying to make it easier. I'm not lying. We might have been followed. But you don't believe that. No. She finished the last stitch, her fingers moving by feel and faith. I just didn't want him to hear what comes next. Which is? Nora sat back, wiped blood from her hands onto her jeans, and looked at this man she'd saved, this killer, this stranger, this broken thing she couldn't seem to stop fixing. You're going to tell me the truth, she said. About who you really are. About what you've done. About why someone would go to the trouble of tying you to train tracks instead of just putting a bullet in your head. She leaned closer, close enough to smell copper and expensive cologne and something underneath that might have been fear. Because I just saved your life twice today, and I deserve to know if I'm going to regret it. Silas was still deciding whether to answer when the sound reached them, a distant mechanical whine that didn't belong in the wilderness, high-pitched and searching. Nora's head snapped toward the cave entrance, where Riley stood silhouetted against the lesser darkness outside. Drones, she whispered, though there was no one close enough to hear. You said they'd have drones. I said they'd have them by nightfall. Silas struggled to sit upright, his face gone gray with effort. I was being optimistic. The whine grew louder, closer, accompanied now by a second sound, something organic and eager that made Nora's stomach drop. Dogs. They'd brought dogs. Riley ran back to them, his eyes wide and white-rimmed in the phone's glow. Mom, there's lights. Moving through the trees. And I heard barking. How many lights? 3. Maybe 4. Nora did the math quickly, the kind of terrible arithmetic that had no good answer. The cave had one entrance. If the dogs picked up their scent, they'd be trapped. If the drones had thermal imaging, and of course they would, people who tied men to train tracks didn't skimp on equipment, then hiding deeper in the cave would just delay the inevitable. We need to move, she said, already repacking the first aid kit with shaking hands. I can't. Silas's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. I'll slow you down. Take your son and go. Stop being noble. It doesn't suit you. I'm not being noble. He met her eyes, and there was something like relief in his expression, like he'd been waiting for this moment since the train tracks. I'm being practical. They want me, not you. If you run now, you might actually make it. The drone sound was louder now, right outside the cave mouth, and beneath it the dogs were baying, frantic and close. Riley's hand found Nora's, his fingers ice-cold and trembling. Mom? She looked at her son, at this man she'd saved, at the cave walls closing in like a fist. Every choice was wrong. Every path led to the same ending. Then Riley spoke again, his voice small but steady. I can lead them away. Absolutely not. The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with a fear so pure it tasted like metal. I'm the fastest. He was already moving toward the entrance, already thinking 3 steps ahead in that way that reminded her so much of Thomas it hurt. I'll take the scent trail south, toward the creek. They'll follow me instead of searching the cave. Riley, no. Mom, listen. He turned back, and in the dim light he looked 17 instead of 12, looked like someone who'd already made his decision and was just waiting for her permission to act on it. You taught me how to move in these woods. How to be quiet. How to hide. His voice cracked, just once. Dad taught me how to be brave when I'm scared. The drone was directly overhead now, its camera probably sweeping the area, its thermal sensors painting them in bright orange against the cold stone. The dogs were maybe 200 yards out, their handlers' voices carrying through the trees like ghosts. Silas made a sound low in his throat. The kid's right. He's 12 years old. And he's your only chance. Silas pushed himself up on one elbow, his face twisted with pain and something else, respect, maybe, or recognition. I was running from men with guns when I was 10. It doesn't get easier, Mrs. Hayes. It just gets necessary. Nora grabbed Riley's shoulders, spun him to face her. You stay on the high ground. You do not engage. You do not try to be a hero. You run, you hide, and when they've passed, you circle back to the lodge. Do you understand me? I understand. Say it back. High ground. Don't engage. Circle back to the lodge. His chin came up, stubborn and terrified and so achingly young. I can do this. She pulled him close, pressed her face into his hair that still smelled like the shampoo she'd bought at the grocery store 3 days ago, back when her biggest worry was whether the lodge's water heater would make it through another winter. I love you, she whispered. Your dad would be so proud of you. I love you too. He pulled away, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Don't let him die. He's kind of cool. Then he was gone, slipping out of the cave like smoke, his footsteps already fading into the distance. Nora counted to 10, then 20, listening to the dogs baying shift direction, following Riley's scent toward the creek and away from the cave. The drone sound changed pitch, moving to track the new target. Smart kid, Silas said quietly. If they catch him, she couldn't finish the sentence. They won't. He said it with absolute certainty, like he knew something about 12-year-old boys running from killers in the dark. He's got your stubbornness and his father's training. He'll be fine. You don't know that. No. Silas closed his eyes, leaning back against the cave wall. But I know men like the ones hunting us. They're good at what they do, but they're lazy. They rely on technology, on overwhelming force. They don't expect a kid to lead them on a 3-mile chase through terrain he knows better than his own bedroom. Outside, the sounds were fading, dogs, drone, voices, all of it bleeding away into the vast darkness of the Devil's Backbone. Riley was out there somewhere, running through trees that could kill him as easily as the men chasing him, and Nora had let him go because the alternative was watching him die trapped in a cave with a stranger who'd brought death to their doorstep. Tell me I did the right thing, she said. You did the only thing. Silas opened his eyes, studied her face in the dying phone light. Now we wait. And if they come back, if they find us, he reached down, pulled something from his boot. A knife, small and wicked sharp, the kind of blade that was made for close work. Then we make sure they regret it. Nora took the knife. It was warm from his skin, perfectly balanced, probably worth more than her truck. She turned it over in her hands, tested the edge against her thumb. I've never killed anyone, she said. I have. His voice was soft, almost gentle. When the time comes, if it comes, just remember, hesitation is what gets you killed. Not the other person. You. The cave fell silent except for their breathing and the distant sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness. Nora sat with the knife in her hands and listened for her son in the wilderness and tried not to think about all the ways this night could end. Riley didn't come back. Nora checked her watch for the 100th time, 2:47 a.m., the numbers glowing green in the absolute darkness of the cave. He should have been back by now. Should have circled around, found his way home, done exactly what she'd told him to do. Unless he couldn't. Stop. Silas's voice cut through her spiral, rough with exhaustion. I can hear you thinking from here. He should be back. He's smart. He's staying away until he's sure it's safe. A pause. Or he made it to the lodge and he's waiting for you there. You don't believe that any more than I do. No, Silas admitted. But it's a better story than the alternatives. The cave had grown colder as the night deepened, the kind of cold that sank into bones and stayed there. Nora had wrapped the emergency blanket around Silas hours ago, watched his shivering gradually subside as his body temperature stabilized. Her own jacket was long gone, given to Riley before he'd run, and now she sat hugging her knees, trying to conserve heat, trying not to imagine her son lying somewhere in the dark with a broken ankle or worse. Come here, Silas said. What? You're freezing. I can hear your teeth chattering. He shifted, wincing, making space beside him against the cave wall. Body heat. It's practical, not personal. I'm fine. You're hypothermic. There's a difference. His tone shifted, taking on an edge of command that probably moved mountains in whatever world he came from. Mrs. Hayes, get over here before you die of stubbornness. She hesitated, then moved. Not because he'd ordered it. She'd stopped taking orders from men when Thomas died, but because he was right and she was cold, and somewhere in the last 12 hours she'd started trusting this stranger with the kind of things you didn't trust strangers with. Like your life. Like your son's life. The space beside him was warm, and when she settled against his uninjured side, the emergency blanket crinkled as he wrapped it around them both. His arm came around her shoulders, careful and deliberate, and she felt his heart beat through the thin fabric of his undershirt, steady, strong, alive despite everything. Better, he asked. Warmer, she conceded. Then, because the darkness made her honest, thank you. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the cave breathe around them, water dripping somewhere deep, wind moving across the entrance like a living thing. Nora's phone had died an hour ago, leaving them in blackness so complete she couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. But she could feel Silas beside her. Could smell him, blood and dirt, and underneath it something expensive that didn't belong in a cave, didn't belong on a man who should have been dead. Tell me about your world, she said finally. The one that did this to you. You don't want to know about my world. I saved you from it. That gives me certain rights. He laughed, short and bitter. My world is made of concrete and corruption. Money that moves like water, power that lives in the space between legal and lethal. I built an empire on other people's weaknesses, and when I stopped being useful, they decided I was a weakness too. Who decided? My second in command. Marcus Chin. We grew up together, ran together, built together. His voice went flat, empty. I trusted him with everything. My business. My secrets. My life. And he tied you to train tracks. He hired someone to tie me to train tracks. Marcus doesn't get his hands dirty anymore. That's what people like me are for. Another pause. We're for. Nora felt him shift beside her, felt the tension in his shoulders that had nothing to do with his wounds. Why didn't he just shoot you? Because shooting me would be quick. Would be merciful. Silas's breath was warm against her hair, his voice dropping to something almost confessional. Marcus wanted me to have time to think about it. To understand that everything I'd built was gone. That everyone I'd trusted had betrayed me. That I was going to die alone and forgotten on some abandoned tracks in the middle of nowhere. But you didn't. No. His arm tightened around her shoulders, just fractionally. Because some widow with terrible judgment and a hero complex decided to save the monster. You're not a monster. You don't know what I've done. I know you told Riley he was brave. I know you gave me a knife and taught me how to use it. I know you're lying here bleeding because you drew them away from my son. She turned her head, trying to see his face in the darkness and finding only shadow. Monsters don't do that. Yes, they do. When it serves them. But there was no conviction in it, just exhaustion and something that might have been hope struggling to survive in hostile territory. Then why are you doing it? The question hung between them like smoke. Nora felt Silas go still, felt his heartbeat kick up against her shoulder, felt the exact moment he decided to tell her the truth. Because when I was on those tracks, he said quietly, watching the sky get dark and waiting to die, all I could think about was how nobody would miss me. How I'd spent 20 years building something that meant nothing to anyone except the people who wanted to take it from me. How I'd forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone who wasn't afraid of me. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers like they'd done it 1,000 times before. And then you showed up. You and your son. And you looked at me like I was worth saving even though every instinct you had was probably screaming to run. It was, Nora admitted. Her thumb moved across his knuckles, tracing scars she couldn't see. I still did it anyway. Why? She thought about Thomas, about the lodge, about all the broken things she'd spent 2 years trying to fix, because fixing them meant she didn't have to fix herself. Thought about Riley's face when he'd asked if they were going to die, and the way Silas had smiled at him like he understood what it meant to be 12 and terrified and trying so hard to be brave. Because I'm tired of letting things die, she said finally. Silas made a sound half laugh, half something else. Even dangerous things? Especially dangerous things. His forehead came to rest against hers, gentle and deliberate, and in the darkness Nora couldn't tell where she ended and he began. Could only feel the warmth of him, the solid reality of another person who is still breathing, still fighting, still here. This is a terrible idea, Silas whispered. I know. Your son would hate me if he knew what I really was. Probably. You should hate me. I'm working on it. But her hand was still in his, her body still pressed against his side, and when his lips found hers in the darkness it felt less like a mistake and more like the first honest thing that had happened since she'd found him on those tracks. The kiss was careful, questioning, nothing like the violence she'd expected. His mouth tasted like blood and something sweeter, desperation, maybe, or gratitude, or the particular madness that happened when you survive something you shouldn't have and realized tomorrow wasn't guaranteed. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Nora rested her head on his shoulder and tried to remember all the reasons this was wrong. She couldn't think of a single one that mattered. Dawn came gray and cold, filtering through the cave entrance like smoke. Nora woke with Silas's arm still around her and the immediate, crushing realization that Riley hadn't come back. She pulled away carefully, trying not to disturb his wounds, but his eyes opened anyway, dark and fever-bright and too knowing. Go, he said before she could speak. Find your son. I'll be here when you get back. You don't know that. I know I can't run. Which means I'm not going anywhere. He smiled, sharp and bitter. Besides, they think I'm dead by now. The dogs lost the scent at the creek. They probably called it a win and went home. Nora wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe the nightmare was over, that she could walk out of this cave and find Riley waiting at the lodge with some story about getting turned around in the dark. Wanted to believe a lot of things that the cold light of morning made impossible. I'll be back before noon, she said, gathering what was left of their supplies. If I'm not, you will be. Said with absolute certainty, like he could bend reality through sheer force of will. Maybe he could. Maybe that's what made him dangerous. She left him the knife and the last of the water and most of the bandages. Kept only Thomas's compass and the hunting knife and a prayer that Riley was alive and safe and waiting. The forest looked different in daylight, less threatening, more familiar. She found Riley's trail easily enough, read the story written in broken branches and disturbed earth. He'd run smart, staying to the high ground, using the terrain like she'd taught him. The dogs had followed for maybe a mile before losing him at the creek where he'd waded upstream, probably for a quarter mile or more before cutting back into the forest. Good boy. Smart boy. Her boy. She was following the trail north, toward the lodge, when she heard the voices. Not Riley's voice. Men's voices, calm and professional, coming from the direction of the old logging road that ran parallel to the creek. Nora dropped into a crouch behind a fallen cedar, controlling her breathing, listening. Waste of time. If Vane's alive, he's long gone by now. Marcus wants confirmation. We don't leave until we find a body. Marcus. The name Silas had spoken in the cave like a curse. His second in command. His betrayer. His friend. Nora edged closer, using the undergrowth for cover until she could see them through the trees. 3 men in tactical gear, expensive and professional, standing beside 2 black SUVs. And 1 other man, separate from the rest, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her truck. He was younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, maybe, with the kind of face that belonged on billboards or magazine covers. Handsome in that artificial way that came from good genes and better money. He was looking at something on his phone, his expression distracted, almost bored. "Sir." One of the tactical guys approached, deferential. The dogs lost the scent. If he made it to one of the caves, then he's dead already. Marcus didn't look up from his phone. Vane was gut-shot and bleeding out. Even if the widow and her kid pulled him off those tracks, he's not walking away from that kind of wound. Not out here. Not without medical attention. The widow. Nora's blood went cold. They knew about her. Had known from the beginning. What about witnesses? Another tactical guy, this one holding what looked like a tablet. The thermal imaging picked up 3 signatures before we lost them. Woman, child, and an adult male matching Vane's profile. Marcus finally looked up, and his eyes were the coldest thing Nora had ever seen. Colder than the cave, colder than the mountain wind, cold like the space between stars. "Find them," he said simply. "All of them. And make it look like an accident." A tragic story, widow and son lost in the wilderness, bodies found months later if at all. The kind of thing that happens when people go hiking unprepared. And if they've already contacted authorities? They haven't. We'd know. Marcus smiled, and it was worse than his cold eyes, worse than his casual talk of murder. "Silas taught me well. You don't leave witnesses. You don't leave loose ends. You finish what you start." He turned back to his phone, already dismissing them, already moving on to whatever empire-building occupied men who killed their best friends and didn't lose sleep over it. Nora backed away slowly, carefully, every movement deliberate and silent. She made it 20 yards before she started running, abandoning stealth for speed, crashing through underbrush with her heart hammering and her mind racing. They were still hunting, still searching. And they knew about Riley. She had to get to the lodge. Had to find her son. Had to warn Silas that his friend, his brother, was out here personally, making sure the job was done right. The cave entrance appeared through the trees and Nora dove inside, gasping for breath, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the flashlight. Silas. He was already sitting up, knife in hand, his face tight with pain and awareness. What happened? Marcus. She swallowed hard, trying to slow her breathing. He's here. At the logging road. With at least 12 men and enough equipment to hunt us until we're dead. Something flickered across Silas's face, recognition, resignation, something that looked almost like grief. Of course he is. Marcus always finishes his own work when it matters. He said you taught him that. I did. Silas closed his eyes, leaning back against the cave wall. I taught him everything. How to read people. How to build loyalty. How to know when someone's become a liability and needs to be eliminated. He opened his eyes, and they were darker than she'd ever seen them. I taught him too well. He's going to kill Riley. Nora heard her voice break, felt tears she'd been holding back for 12 hours finally spill over. He's going to kill my son because I saved you. No. Silas pushed himself to his feet, swaying but steady, his face set with something harder than determination. He's going to try. There's a difference. You can barely stand. I've fought worse odds in worse condition. He took the knife from her hands, tested its weight, his movements suddenly precise and professional despite the blood loss and pain. And Marcus has never fought me on ground I chose. He's always had the advantage: numbers, weapons, preparation. His smile was sharp enough to cut. Out here, Mrs. Hayes, we're the advantage. This is your mountain. Your territory. Your home. And if that's not enough? Silas met her eyes, and in them she saw the man who'd built an empire on other people's fear, who'd survived betrayals and violence and being left to die on train tracks. Then we make sure he remembers me, he said quietly. Every single day for the rest of his life. They found Riley at the lodge, but he wasn't alone. Nora saw the black SUV first, parked where her truck should have been, and her heart stopped. Then she saw the broken window in the kitchen, the door hanging open like a wound, and something inside her went very quiet and very cold. Silas's hand caught her arm before she could run forward. Wait. My son is in there. Which is why we don't rush in blind. His grip tightened, firm but not cruel. Look. 2 sets of footprints in the mud. Riley's sneakers and someone bigger. Military boots, probably size 11. They went in through the kitchen maybe 20 minutes ago. How can you tell? Because this is what I do, Nora. He released her arm, his eyes scanning the lodge with the kind of professional assessment that made her remember exactly what he was. The mud's still wet on the porch. The engine's still ticking. Listen. And there's no backup vehicle, which means whoever's inside is either very confident or very stupid. Or they have my son hostage and know I'll come. That too. Silas moved toward the tree line, favoring his injured side, but moving with purpose. How many entrances? Front, back, basement, storm doors. Her mind was racing, cataloging the lodge's layout the way Thomas had made her practice after that meth cook had broken in 2 years before Riley was born. There's a crawl space under the south side that connects to the basement. Access panel behind the woodshed. Can Riley get to it? If he knows we're here. If he's not, she couldn't finish the sentence. Silas studied the lodge, his jaw tight. The broken window is tactical. They want you to see it, want you scared and reactive. Which means Riley's probably fine. Bait only works if it's alive. That's not as comforting as you think it is. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be true. He pulled the knife from his belt, tested its weight. I'll go through the crawl space, come up through the basement. You give me 3 minutes, then make noise at the front door. Draw whoever's inside toward you. Absolutely not. You can barely walk. I can fight. There's a difference. His eyes found hers, and in them she saw the ruthless calculation that had built an empire and survived its collapse. Trust me, Nora. This is what I'm good at. She wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that walking into her home, her safe place, the last piece of Thomas she had left, and turning it into a battlefield was exactly the wrong answer. But Riley was inside with someone who'd been sent by Marcus Chin, and Marcus didn't leave witnesses, didn't leave loose ends, didn't leave anything alive that could testify against him. 3 minutes, she said. Then I'm coming in whether you're ready or not. Silas smiled, quick and dangerous. I wouldn't expect anything less. He disappeared around the side of the lodge, moving with surprising speed for a man who'd been gut-shot 18 hours ago. Nora counted to 60, then another 60, watching the broken window for movement, for signs of Riley, for anything that would tell her this wasn't about to go catastrophically wrong. At 2 minutes and 45 seconds, she walked up to the front door and knocked. The sound echoed through the lodge like a gunshot. Nora heard footsteps inside, heavy, unhurried, and then the door swung open. The man standing there was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that would be forgettable except for his eyes. They were old eyes, wrong eyes, eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. He held a pistol casually at his side, pointed at the floor but ready. Mrs. Hayes. His voice was pleasant, almost friendly. We've been waiting for you. Where's my son? Inside. Unharmed. For now. He stepped aside, gesturing with the gun. Mr. Chin would like to speak with you. He has a proposition. Nora's hand found the hunting knife at her belt, hidden under her jacket. And if I say no? Then your son dies, and you die, and we still find Silas Vane eventually. He shrugged, like he was discussing the weather. But Mr. Chin prefers to keep things civilized. Come inside. Please. She walked past him into her own home, into the living room where she'd taught Riley to read and celebrated his birthdays and mourned Thomas in the long nights when sleep wouldn't come. The furniture was exactly where she'd left it. The photos on the mantel were undisturbed. Even the dish towel Riley had left on the counter that morning a lifetime ago was still there, still damp. Everything was the same except for the man sitting in Thomas's chair. Marcus Chin looked different in person than he had through the trees. Smaller somehow, more ordinary. He was reading one of Riley's school books, his expression mildly interested, like he'd just stopped by for tea. Mrs. Hayes. He stood, setting the book aside carefully. I apologize for the dramatic circumstances. Your son is in the bedroom, incidentally. Unharmed. I'm not a monster. Where's Silas? The young man with the gun had moved behind her, blocking the front door. An excellent question. Marcus smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. I was hoping you could tell me. You see, we found evidence you pulled him off those tracks. Blood trail, rope fibers, the whole story. Very heroic of you. Very stupid. Nora said nothing, counting seconds in her head. Silas should be in the basement by now. Should be moving through the layout she'd described, using the lodge's strange architecture, the way the basement stairs came up right behind the kitchen, the way the bedroom hallway had a closet that connected to the bathroom. All the quirks and oddities that came from 3 generations of Hayes men building additions without bothering with permits or proper planning. Here's my proposition, Marcus continued. You tell me where Silas is. I make his death quick instead of slow. And you and your son walk away from this. New names, new life, enough money that you won't have to worry about keeping this place running anymore. And if I don't? Then I kill you both, burn the lodge, and keep hunting. He said it casually, like he was ordering coffee. Silas is already dead, blood loss, infection, exposure, take your pick. I'm just trying to close the books cleanly. A floorboard creaked somewhere deeper in the house. Marcus's eyes flicked toward the sound, his hand moving to the gun at his belt. That would be your son, the young man behind Nora said. He's been restless. But Nora knew the sounds of her own house, knew which boards creaked and where and why. That wasn't Riley's weight. That was someone heavier, moving through the bedroom hallway toward the kitchen. Marcus knew it too. She saw the recognition in his eyes, saw him draw his weapon with professional speed, saw the young man behind her raise his pistol. Get down. Silas's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, and then the lights went out. He'd killed the breaker, she realized, plunging the lodge into the gray dawn shadows. Nora dropped and rolled left as gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness like lightning. She heard glass shatter, heard Marcus shouting orders, heard the young man curse as someone slammed into him from the kitchen. Riley, she screamed. Basement. Now. A door banged open down the hall. Small footsteps running. Her son alive, moving. Nora pulled the hunting knife and lunged toward where the young man had been standing. Found him grappling with Silas in the darkness, their shapes intertwined and violent. She didn't hesitate, didn't think, just drove the knife into the exposed line of his ribs the way Silas had shown her. The man made a wet, surprised sound and went down. More gunfire, closer now. Marcus had moved toward the hallway, toward Riley, and Nora felt something inside her break open and turn feral. She launched herself at him in the darkness, all teeth and rage, and 2 years of grief turned to weapon. They went down together in a tangle of limbs, and she felt his gun against her ribs, felt him trying to bring it to bear. Then Silas was there, appearing out of the shadows like he'd been born in them, and his hand closed around Marcus's wrist with a crack that might have been bone. "Hello, brother," Silas whispered. "Miss me?" Marcus's gun clattered across the hardwood floor, spinning into shadow. Nora scrambled for it, But Silas was already moving, hauling Marcus upright with a strength that shouldn't have been possible given the blood soaking through his bandages. "Riley." Nora's voice cracked. "Are you in the basement?" "I'm here, Mom." Faint, muffled by the floor, but alive. Safe. Her knees nearly buckled with relief. "Stay there. Don't come up no matter what you hear." Silas had Marcus pressed against the wall now, forearm across his throat, their faces inches apart. In the gray dawn light filtering through the windows, they could have been brothers, same build, same intensity, same cold calculation in their eyes. "You should have stayed on those tracks," Marcus said, his voice strained but steady. "Would have been easier for everyone." "When have I ever made things easy?" Silas's smile was sharp, feral. "You taught me that. Or did I teach you? I forget who corrupted whom. Does it matter?" Marcus's hand moved, subtle and quick, reaching for something at his belt. Nora saw it before Silas did. Backup piece, ankle holster, the kind of thing professionals carried because amateurs only prepared once. She opened her mouth to shout a warning, but Marcus was already moving, twisting against Silas's weakened grip, bringing the small pistol up. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Silas staggered backward, red blooming across his shoulder, and Marcus leveled the pistol at Nora with the kind of professional calm that made her understand exactly how many people he'd killed. "I really am sorry about this," Marcus said. "You seem like a good person. But you've seen too much, know too much, and I can't have you testifying when this eventually reaches the authorities." Nora raised her hands slowly, her mind racing through options that all ended the same way. The hunting knife was on the floor somewhere. Marcus's dropped pistol was too far. Silas was down but still moving, trying to stand, leaving a smear of blood on the wall. "Let her go." Silas's voice was rough, shredded. "This is between us. Has always been between us. It stopped being between us when you got civilians involved." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. "When you made this complicated." "Wait." Nora heard herself speak, heard the desperation she was trying to hide. "You said you wanted to close the books cleanly. Make a deal." Marcus paused. "I'm listening. Me for my son. Let Riley walk out of here. Let him go to his grandparents in Seattle. He's 12 years old. He doesn't know anything useful. He can't identify you. It was dark. He was hiding. He never saw your face." "Mom, no." Riley's voice came up through the floor, panicked and young. "Don't." "Quiet, baby." She kept her eyes on Marcus, on the gun pointed at her chest. "This is grown-up business." Marcus considered, his head tilting slightly. "And Silas." "I don't care what happens to Silas." The lie came easily, smoothly, because it had to. "I saved him because I'm not the kind of person who leaves people to die. But I don't know him. Don't owe him anything. My son is all that matters." She felt Silas's eyes on her, felt the weight of the betrayal she was performing, hoped desperately that he was smart enough to understand what she was really doing. "Mom," Riley again, closer now, like he was climbing the basement stairs. "Stay down there." She put every ounce of command she had into her voice, every threat and promise and desperate plea. "Do not come up here. Do you understand me?" Silence from below. Then, quietly, "I understand." Marcus studied her face, looking for the lie, for the angle, for whatever trap she might be setting. "You'd trade yourself for the boy. Just like that. Just like that." Nora took a step forward, hands still raised. "I'm a widow running a failing lodge in the middle of nowhere. I'm nobody. My son has his whole life ahead of him. It's not even a choice. It's always a choice." But Marcus was lowering the gun, just slightly, considering. "Silas. Your opinion." Silas had made it to his feet, swaying, his face gray with blood loss and pain and something else, understanding, maybe, or respect. "She's telling the truth. Let the kid go." "He's useless to you." "And you?" Marcus asked. "I'm already dead. We both know it." Silas touched his shoulder, his hand coming away crimson. "You put enough holes in me that I won't make it to a hospital. So finish it. But let them go first. Give me that much. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, the gun steady in his hand, his face unreadable. Then he smiled, quick, humorless, the smile of a man solving a difficult equation. Here's my counteroffer, he said. The woman and child go free. You stay, Silas. We finish this the way it should have been finished on those tracks, just you and me, no witnesses, no complications. He paused. And when you're dead, I let them disappear. New names, new life, my word on it. Your word's worthless, Silas said flatly. Maybe, but it's the best offer you're going to get. Nora watched Silas consider it, watched him look at her with eyes that had seen everything and survived nothing, watched him make the same calculation she'd made 1,000 times since Thomas died. What's worth living for? What's worth dying for? And what's the difference when it comes down to it? Deal, Silas said quietly. On one condition. You're not in a position to negotiate. I am if you want this to end clean. Silas straightened, ignoring the blood, ignoring the pain, becoming something harder and more dangerous despite his wounds. You let me say goodbye. 30 seconds. Then we do this however you want. Marcus considered, then nodded. 30 seconds. Use them wisely. Silas crossed to Nora in 3 unsteady steps, and his hands found her face, tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. Up close, she could see the fever burning in them, could see the edges of his vision starting to blur with shock and blood loss. The shotgun, he whispered, so quiet even Marcus couldn't hear. Behind the bookshelf, loaded, safety off. When I move, you move. Get Riley and run. Silas. No arguments. No heroics. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, tender and terrible. You saved me once. Let me return the favor. Then he kissed her hard and desperate and final, tasting like blood and goodbye, and all the things that might have been if they'd met in some other life where train tracks were just train tracks and strangers stayed strangers. When he pulled away, his smile was sad and certain and completely unafraid. Thank you, he said, loud enough for Marcus to hear. For everything. Then he turned and walked toward Marcus with his hands raised, bleeding and swaying and buying her time with the only currency he had left. His life for theirs. The unthinkable sacrifice. Nora's hand closed around the bookshelf, felt the familiar weight of Thomas's shotgun, and waited for the moment when Silas would keep his final promise. Silas moved 3 steps before he collapsed. It wasn't dramatic, no cry of pain, no stumbling, just a sudden absence of strength, his legs giving out like someone had cut his strings. He went down hard, catching himself on one hand, his blood painting the hardwood floor in dark, spreading pools. Marcus raised his gun, but Nora was already moving, already pulling the shotgun from behind the bookshelf, already squeezing the trigger before she'd fully processed the decision. The blast caught Marcus in the chest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him backward into the wall. He slid down slowly, his expression more surprised than pained, the gun falling from nerveless fingers. Mom? Riley's voice from the basement stairs, small and terrified. Stay there. Nora was already kneeling beside Silas, her hands pressing against the new wound in his shoulder, the old wound in his side, trying to hold together a man who was falling apart beneath her fingers. Call 911. Tell them we need life flight. Tell them. Already done. Riley's voice was steadier now, adult in a way that broke her heart. They're coming. Silas's eyes found hers, unfocused and fading. You should have run. I'm really bad at following instructions. She pressed harder, feeling warm blood pulse between her fingers. Too much blood. Too fast. Stay with me. The helicopter's coming. You're going to be fine. Liar. But he smiled, and it was almost genuine. Better liar than I thought. The next 20 minutes blurred together, Riley's voice on the phone giving directions, the distant sound of rotors cutting through mountain air, Nora's hands turning red and then crimson, and then just numb. She talked to Silas the whole time, telling him about the lodge, about Thomas, about Riley's first steps and last birthday, and all the ordinary miracles that made up a life worth living. She told him things she'd never told anyone, secrets and fears and hopes, filling the silence with words because if she stopped talking he might stop breathing. The paramedics came through the door like a tactical team, professional and fast, and Nora let them take him because she didn't have a choice. Let them load him onto the stretcher, let them carry him out to the helicopter that had landed in her front yard, churning up dust and memory. One of the paramedics, young, competent, kind, touched her shoulder. "Ma'am, we need to check you too. You're covered in blood." "It's not mine." "Still. Please." She let them examine her while the helicopter lifted off, taking Silas away, taking the last 48 hours with him. Let them clean her hands and bandage cuts she didn't remember getting and ask questions she couldn't quite answer. The police came next. Then the FBI. Then people in suits who didn't identify themselves and asked very specific questions about Marcus Chin and Silas Vane and what exactly had happened in these woods. Nora told them the truth mostly. A man tied to train tracks. A widow and her son. A desperate flight through the wilderness. Self-defense when the hunters found them. She left out the cave. The kiss. The way Silas had looked at her like she was worth dying for. Some truths were too complicated for official reports. 3 days later, a man in an expensive suit came to the lodge while Nora was replacing the broken window. He didn't introduce himself, just stood watching her work with the kind of patience that made her nervous. "Mrs. Hayes, I represent certain interested parties who would like to ensure your continued discretion regarding recent events." Nora set down her hammer. "I already talked to the FBI. I'm aware. Your statement was appropriately vague." He pulled an envelope from his jacket, set it on the porch railing. "Consider this a gesture of appreciation. For your restraint. And for saving a life that certain people consider valuable. How is he?" The question came out before she could stop it. The man's expression didn't change. "Recovering. Elsewhere. It would be inadvisable for you to attempt contact." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Hayes, he asked about you. About your son. Wanted to ensure you were both safe. Tell him we're fine." "I will." He walked to a black sedan she hadn't noticed in her driveway. "And Mrs. Hayes?" "The people who worked for Marcus Chin, the ones who survived, have been dealt with. You won't be bothered again." Then he was gone, leaving only the envelope and the faint smell of expensive cologne. Nora waited until Riley was asleep that night before she opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for an amount that made her hands shake, enough to fix the lodge's roof, replace the furnace, maybe even upgrade to modern plumbing. Enough to stop drowning. And underneath the check, a note in handwriting she'd never seen but somehow recognized. "For the widow who saves broken things. Use it wisely. The cave system connects to an old mine shaft 2 miles north. If you ever need to disappear, start there. S." Nora read it 3 times, then burned it in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. 2 weeks later, she was hiking with Riley near the Devil's Backbone when she saw it, fresh boot prints in the mud near the cave entrance. Not tactical boots this time. Expensive shoes, Italian leather, the kind Silas had been wearing when she'd found him on those tracks. She followed them for exactly 10 steps before stopping. Riley looked up at her. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Nora turned back toward the trail home, toward the lodge, toward the life she was rebuilding one careful piece at a time. "Just thought I saw something." But that night, lying in bed listening to the wind move through the pines, she went to the window and looked out at the dark mountain. And there, barely visible in the moonlight, a figure stood at the tree line, tall, watching, waiting. He raised one hand. A greeting or a goodbye or a promise. Then he turned and disappeared into the forest like he'd never been there at all. Nora stood at the window for a long time after, her hand pressed against the cold glass, knowing she should be afraid, should be calling the police, should be protecting Riley from the dangerous man who'd brought death to their doorstep. Instead, she found herself smiling. Because some broken things she'd learned never stayed fixed. They just learned to live with the cracks. And sometimes, just sometimes, those cracks were where the light got in. She went back to bed and dreamed of train tracks and caves and kisses that tasted like goodbye. And in the morning, when Riley asked why she kept looking out the window, she told him she was just checking the weather. He didn't believe her. She could see it in his eyes, that new wisdom that came from running through dark woods with killers on your trail. But he was 12 and she was his mother, so he let her keep her secrets. Just like she let him keep his. The envelope arrived 3 months later, forwarded through a lawyer Nora had never heard of. Inside was a deed to 40 acres of forest adjoining her property, the section that included the Devil's Backbone and the cave system, and the old mine shaft that led nowhere and everywhere. No note this time. No explanation. Just a signature at the bottom of the deed in handwriting she recognized, S. Vane. Nora filed the deed away and didn't tell anyone. Went about her days running the lodge, raising Riley, fixing the roof with money from a man who didn't exist. At night, she'd sometimes walk to the edge of her new property, to the place where the trees got dense and the shadows got deep, and wonder if he was out there somewhere. Watching. Waiting. Keeping his distance, but never quite leaving. Some threats, she'd learned, were never truly neutralized. They just changed shape. Became something else. Something that lived in the space between danger and desire, between fear and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The mountain kept its secrets. So did Nora. And in the valley below, echoes of violence and survival and unlikely salvation faded into legend, the story of a widow who saved a monster and lived to tell about it. Or chose not to tell. Which was almost the same thing.